Hello, everybody. Welcome to St. Clements in Ewell, where it's very hot, and we're trying our best to keep cool. By the time you watch this, it'll be freezing cold, so don't worry. Um, this heat is not going to last for long. Now, what I'm going to talk about this time is the apocalyptic discourse of Jesus in Mark's 13th chapter. So we're in chapter 13. Now, please remember, Mark is 16 chapters. You've all got a cheat sheet in front of you. Mark is 16 chapters. Of those 16 chapters, one chapter is devoted to the apocalyptic discourse. Now, you've all heard of the apocalypse. And the apocalypse is the last book of the Bible, the apocalypse of St. John. And you all know what Oscar Wilde says. He says the book of life starts with a man and a woman in a garden, and it ends with revelations. Apocalypse means revelation or unveiling. And therefore, we talk about the book of Revelation, which also is just a Latin for unveiling, or the apocalypse. Then, of course, we also remember what Martin Luther said about the apocalypse, the book of the apocalypse. He says, it reveals nothing. Quite crossly, he said. And he did have a point, I suppose. If you're looking for future events, you won't find them in the apocalypse. There people have always done in the book of Revelation, the number of the beast is a number of a man, it is 666. And they worked out all sorts of theories from this and so on. Waste of time. Yes.
I was just going to say that wasn't one of Oscar Wilde's most wittiest comments.
What? Oh, I think it's a very witty comment. The book of life begins with a man and woman in the garden, ends with revelations. Yes. It's Canon Chasuble says it in which play by Oscar Wilde? I can't remember. The Importance of Being Earnest. Okay. No. So anyway, the book of Revelation is not really a revelation about future events. The book of Revelation is, I suppose, telling us about the present and telling us about how we are people who are called to a heavenly future. And it's also a book of encouragement addressed to those who are facing martyrdom. So that's the book of Revelation at the end of the Bible. Now, what we don't normally think about, because this part of St. Mark's Gospel is very rarely touched on, is that there are lots of apocalypses in the Bible. The longest apocalypse is that in Daniel. The prophet Daniel has got a very long apocalypse. And that was also written at a time when the Jewish people were facing martyrdom for keeping to the law. And so it was an encouragement for the Jewish people to keep the faith because God would eventually intervene and avenge them against the injustices of Antiochus Epiphanes. Then, of course, we've got the apocalypses in the Gospels. The one in the 13th chapter of St. Mark, and then you've got it also in St. Luke, and you've also got it in St. Matthew. They, generally speaking, don't get much attention. Now, here we've got the whole 13th chapter in front of you. As he was making his way out of the temple area, one of the disciples said to him, look, teacher, what stones and what buildings? And we know this is true because King Herod had used these enormous stones, some of which still exist at the Western Wall. Jesus said to him, do you see these great buildings? There will not be one stone left upon another that will not be thrown down. As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple area, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, tell us, when will this happen? And what sign will there be when all these things are about to come to an end? So Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple. If you go to Jerusalem today, you can see those vast stones left by Herod the Great at the foundation of the Western Wall. And you can also see further along from the Western Wall, the vast stones that were thrown down by the Jews who were resisting the Romans, who threw them down on the heads of the Romans, and they landed at the bottom and they're still there. And so not one stone will be left upon another has actually been fulfilled if you look at the ruins of just next door to the temple area. So when will this happen and what sign will there be? Jesus began to say to them, see that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name saying, I am he, and they will deceive many. Okay? When you hear of wars and reports of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but it will not yet be the end. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes from place to place, and there will be famines. These are the beginnings of the labor pains. Now, this, of course, is all of this. We say there are going to be famines. That's an easy prediction to make. There are famines all the time, and there were famines in the time of our blessed Lord, I'm sure. And of course, there were famines in the Bible, if you remember, at the time of Joseph. Um, but Jesus actually cautions restraint. See that nobody deceives you. Don't get carried away. Many will come in my name saying, I'm he, and they will deceive many. Do not listen to the false messiahs. When you hear of wars and disasters, don't be alarmed. These things must happen, but it's not yet the end. These are the beginnings of the labor pains. So don't allow yourselves to be overly upset and distressed by the travails, another word for labor pains, of the world. Makes sense? Now, I think he's actually saying just to try and be a bit optimistic. Don't constantly seek for disasters, and don't go round like those people with the sandwich boards saying the end is nigh. Don't be like the most famous comic character in British television, the one who goes around saying, we're doomed, we're all doomed. Yes, in Dad's Army. Don't do that. See that no one deceives you, he says. And of course, the idea of we're all doomed and so on, and the idea that the end is nigh, in fact, the end is going to be very soon, prophets who come, or false prophets who come, and tell us that the end is nigh, these are usually associated with the outlying splinter groups of the Protestant movement. And in fact, there's one place where this goes on rather a lot, and that is, of course, the United States of America. There have been quite a few people who've gathered their followers in various places in America and announced the end of the world. And then, sadly, it didn't happen, which was a terrible disappointment. But there was, if you remember, a apocalyptic cult which gathered in Guyana in a place called, what was it called? Jonestown. And what did they do? They all killed themselves, or they all poisoned themselves, or he poisoned them? Can't remember what the fake. Yeah, a fake messiah. Who was their leader? Bill? Someone.
Somebody Jones.
No, was he called somebody? I can't remember. But it was a big thing in the old days, or some years ago. And there was also Waco in Texas. A whole load of millenarians. Is that what you call it? Yeah, and did they all kill themselves, or were they all killed by the police? Yeah, yeah. But basically, they were just being American. Because in America, this is very much a thing. Because America, don't forget, it's a city built on a hilltop. And America is, the perfect nation, etc., etc. They have very, very, very strong beliefs in the end times in America. And of course, the most successful end time false prophet is Joseph Smith, because he announced the end in New York State. Then he said we must all move west, and this, that, and the other, and so on and so forth. The founder of Mormonism, which started off as an end time sort of cult, I think. But then, of course, when the end times didn't happen, it sort of hung on. But this idea of the end times cult is very strong in America. Now, watch out for yourselves. So having talked about the end times, saying let's not exaggerate, Jesus then goes on to say, watch out for yourself, they will hand you over to the courts. You will be beaten in synagogues. You'll be arraigned before governors and kings because of me as a witness before them. But the gospel must first be preached to all nations. Now, this is not apocalyptic. This is simply a prediction of what is going to happen to the earliest Christians. Now, so in other words, what you've got is you've got here two subjects which have been interspliced. Do you see? Watch out for yourselves. They'll hand you over to the courts. You're going to be put on trial. You're going to be beaten, whipped in the synagogues. You'll be had up before governors and kings because of me. As a witness before them, you'll bear witness in the courts, like St. Paul did. But the gospel must first be preached to all the nations. This is part of the preaching of the gospel to all the nations. Then, again, he talks about the persecution of early Christians. When they lead you away and hand you over, so when you're arrested and locked up, do not worry beforehand about what you are to say, but say whatever will be given to you at that hour. For it will not be you who are speaking, but the Holy Spirit. Brother will hand over brother to death, and the father his child. Children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but the one who perseveres to the end will be saved. Jesus is talking about the persecution of the church. And presumably, it was a fact that people were handed over by their own relatives. They were denounced by their own relatives to the police. And because, in the Roman system, if you denounced somebody and they were executed, you got their money. And therefore, it was a real encouragement for children to denounce their parents. Because you could get rid of them and then you get the cash, don't you? Makes sense when you think about it. And of course, I've talked, I think, before about Flavia Domitilla. She was a relation of the emperor, and she was denounced as a Christian, and she was taken away and executed with her husband. So this was quite common. And you will be hated by all because of my name. And we do know that the Christians were hated because people didn't understand them, and they were looked upon as the bringers of bad luck. Now, when Rome burnt down in the reign of the Emperor Nero blamed the Christians. He didn't do this just off the top of his head. He blamed them because they were very, very unpopular. And then he had them rounded up and executed, and everybody was quite happy. Also, during the reign of Diocletian, the Christians were blamed for a variety of ills and rounded up and executed and their property taken off them. One of the reasons is because the Roman army, it is thought, blamed the Christians for their defeat in battle. And therefore, if you get rid of the Christians, then we'll all be happy again. Now, this has happened again and again in human history, what's called the othering, as we say in modern parlance, of some small group. And if you remember, Hitler, his most popular slogan was Die Juden sind unser Unglück, which means the Jews are our misfortune. Get rid of the Jews, get rid of our misfortune. Everything will be hunky-dory in Germany once we've got rid of the Jews. And people believed it because of the stab in the back myth. The German army, best army in the world, it had lost the First World War, not because it was no good at fighting, it was winning the war, but it was stabbed in the back by Jewish financiers and people like that. Therefore, if we get rid of the Jews, we get rid of the cause of our woe. And similarly, Nero and later Domitian and later Diocletian would have taken this same view. Hence, you have a very famous martyr of the time of Diocletian, George, who was an army officer. He was an ensign, wasn't he? Which I don't think is a very big officer. But he was sent to his death because, of course, he was, what do you call it when, not an infiltrator, what do you call it when you get somebody who's not one of you but pretending to be one of you? A what?
Double agent.
A double agent, a Trojan horse, an infiltrator. There's a special word for it. What do you call it? Traitor, yes. Sort of, he was unmasked as a Christian, and therefore they said, now we've discovered the cause of our bad luck. We can get rid of him. Everything will be fine in the army. And so that's why St. George was probably martyred. Anyway, but the gospel was first to be preached to all nations. When they lead you away and hand you over, he says, do not worry about what you have to say. You'll be inspired by the Holy Spirit. And they were inspired by the Holy Spirit, which infuriated their enemies, the Romans. And then he says, you'll be hated by all because of my name, but the one who perseveres to the end will be saved. So this is an exhortation to persevere to the end. Do not be put off by what is going to happen to you. Rely on the Holy Spirit to inspire you, and do not be put off. And as we see, the most famous martyrs of all, because I had a book written about them, Felicity and Perpetua, were inspired to go into the arena and face the wild beasts and not turn a hair and not be frightened. Okay, you know this old story about when the Christians were put in the amphitheatre, the lions were let out to eat the Christians, and the lions didn't eat the Christians, and everybody got really disappointed. They thought, we can't see people being, yeah, and they said, this is awful, we paid good money when it was free, but you thought, we've been really looking forward to this, but nothing's happened. The reason for that was not because the lions realized the Christians were nice people and wouldn't eat them, it's because the Christians remained in prayer, kneeling down, not running. Lions only attack you if you go running around hysterically and screaming. Then they'll go for you, like cats. They go for mice because mice run away and so on and so forth. And therefore, bears as well. That's good. They probably expose them. Being exposed to wild beasts probably meant being exposed to bears as well. Yeah. Now, then it says something that is very specific and very much a prediction of what's going to happen. When you see the desolating abomination standing where he should not, brackets, let the reader understand. In other words, this is a riddle. It's standing for something else. Those in Judea must flee to the mountains, and the person on the housetop must not go down or enter to get anything out of his house, and the person in the field must not return to get his cloak. Woe to the pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that this does not happen in winter, for those times will have tribulation such as not been known since the beginning of God's creation until now, nor ever will be. So what is going to happen is the very worst possible thing that can happen, before or since. If the Lord had not shortened those days, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect who he did choose, he did shorten the days. What he's talking about here, presumably, now why is it a riddle that you've got to interpret? So it's capable of multiple interpretations. What it's probably talking about, what the author was probably thinking about, was the destruction of the temple by the Emperor Titus, who in those days wasn't yet the emperor, and by the desolating abomination standing where he should not, the setting up of the Roman standards on the Temple Mount. Now, the Romans believed that their standards were gods. They worshipped their standards. They're not quite gods. They were sort of they were fetish items. As long as the standard was safe, the legion was safe. Therefore, if the standard was lost in battle, it's you had that guy holding the thing, and therefore that was terrible bad luck. So when they planted their standard in the Temple Mount, this was the abomination of desolation. In other words, it was a pagan idol set up in the temple of the living God. And therefore, all hell will then break loose, then the whole of Jerusalem will be destroyed. And Jesus is saying, if you are on the housetop, don't go downstairs and pack, run for the hills. Now, historically speaking, just before the siege of Jerusalem, the Christian community left Jerusalem and went across to the other side of the Jordan and lived there, and as a result were spared. I can't remember where it was exactly they went. There weren't very many of them. There would have been about a couple of hundred of them. They migrated. And those who didn't, the most awful things happened to them. What happened to them is all the men were killed, and all the women and children who weren't killed were sold into slavery. And Jerusalem was leveled. And only much later, in the time of Hadrian, was Jerusalem rebuilt as a pagan city. So that's what our Blessed Lord is saying. But of course, it could mean something else. It could mean, in our own day, when you see the desolating abomination standing where he should not, those in Judea must flee to the mountains and so on and so forth. It could mean, it could just mean any horrible catastrophe overtaking humanity. It is certainly a picture of catastrophe. Pray that this does not happen in winter. Very eloquent line. Nowadays, we've rather glossed over catastrophe. One of the things that very recently, in the last 10, 20 years, a man called Anthony Beevor wrote a book called Stalingrad. And it was a book about the Battle of Stalingrad, which was the most appalling battle of all time. thousands and thousands and thousands of people were killed, starved to death, and so on, including civilians. Then Anthony Beevor went on to write a book about, it was called Berlin 1945, I think. Was that what it was called? Some of you may have read, which was about the battle for Berlin. Starts in January 1945 and it ends in the fall of Berlin, which was roughly the first week of May in 1945. And it's all the things that happened in those 5 months. The actual details are horrific. I mean, they're quite. Have any of you read it? Because what happened was Hitler, in his lack of wisdom, told all the Germans to stay exactly where they were. And the ones in East Prussia were cut off. And then what happened is some of them tried to get away by boat but were bombed and drowned in the Baltic. Others tried to cross the ice and the ice cracked and they were drowned and this, that, the other, or machine gunned on the ice and so on. The ones who weren't able to get away had the most awful things done to them. And I know a lady when she was she remembers aged 4 being put on the back of a cart, and the cart didn't stop until they got to Dusseldorf. But they went from East Prussia to Dusseldorf to get away from the Germans. And she said she went with her parents. The grandparents stayed behind, and they never saw or heard of them again. And I said, well, what do you think happened to them? She said, oh, we hope they were shot. But the true horror is they were probably being shot would have been okay, but they might have well have been the lady might have been raped, or they might have starved to death, or they might have been tortured to death, or whatever. Every single woman between East Prussia and Berlin was raped. Every single one, at least once. Most were gang raped by the Russian soldiers, and everybody was robbed and so on. It was the most. This is the amazing thing: is that Goebbels had promised them, saying the horde is coming from the east, etc., and they are savages, and Goebbels was completely correct. And of course, this was hushed up until Anthony Beevor wrote about it. Nobody talked about it. Now, this Our Blessed Lord here shows a realism about the horrors that have unfolded in the 20th century. And he says, and I think this is the most wonderful thing, pray that this does not happen in winter. And of course, even in 1918, there were people starving to death in Germany. And in 1918, in 1918, there were people starving to death in Austria and in Hungary and places like that in Central Europe. And then, of course, in 1918, there was after the end of the First World War, the fighting didn't stop because there was Soviet communist uprisings in Berlin and in Hungary and in Austria, and so war which was put down with savage brutality. There was awful street fighting in all those cities. So pray that this does not happen. And everybody was starving as well. And they wouldn't give them any food until they'd signed the Treaty of Versailles. They stopped the food going in. So so our Blessed Lord is, if the Lord had not shortened these days, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he did shorten these days. It's quite a powerful passage. Now he says, look, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, look, there he is, do not believe it. Again, apocalyptic expectation, dial it down. False messiahs and false prophets will arise and will perform signs and wonders in order to mislead. So they will do miracles. Maybe they're fake miracles. If it were possible, the elect, be watchful. I've told about you beforehand. Now, the false messiahs, who are they? Well, take your pick. Mary Baker Eddy, founder of Christian Science. What L. Ron Hubbard, founder of Scientology. Obviously, Joseph Smith Jr., founder of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Can you think of any other false prophets? What was the name of that guy, Shabbatai, Zvi Shabbatai, who claimed to be the Messiah? He was Jewish, but he wasn't the Messiah. He was a very naughty boy. He was locked up by the Turks and then became a Muslim. I mean, but he got quite a few followers, and there are other false prophets as well, who I don't need to name, but you've all heard of. In fact, when you look at some of these false prophets, many of them are people who suffer from terrible delusions, and they are in fact listening to voices in their head and writing it all down, saying they've had a revelation from God, which isn't true. Okay? But many will follow them. Jesus says, he just says, and before that, if thou be watchful, do not believe it. Do not believe it. Now, which bit of that is hard to understand? Do not believe it. And again, there's only one, the revelation ends with Jesus Christ and the apostles. There's no need for further revelations. There are such things as private revelations, but there's no need for further revelations. You've got it all. You've got the fullness of truth already in Jesus Christ. You don't need supplements. And of course, human beings being the sort of people who are constantly looking for secret knowledge and so on and so forth, or constantly going for supplements, aren't they? But you don't need those supplements. That's really very important. Now, in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and this again is apocalypse. The moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from the sky, and the powers in heaven will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds, as Daniel predicted, with great power and glory. And he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the sky. That is the scene that is depicted on the wall of the Sistine Chapel. That Jesus will appear on the heavens, and all these people, everybody will be summoned from the four corners of the earth for the last judgment. The sun will be darkened. In other words, it will be the end of the cosmos, the conclusion of the cosmos. Then Jesus goes on from talking about the last judgment, talking about something particularly obvious. Learn a lesson from the fig tree, the one I pointed out to you the other day, where its branches become tender and sprout leaves. You know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, you know that he is near at the gates. Amen. I say to you, this generation, and then this is, of course, the most problematic verse in the whole of the scriptures. This generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Now, what on earth is happening? And many people have, particularly liberal German Lutheran theologians. So how many bads is that? Liberal German Lutheran theologians. Yeah. I mean, whenever you meet somebody with a German accent telling you what's what, move swiftly on. Okay, I really do think about that. For God's sake. I mean, they're the ones who started how many wars, and they're now telling us what to do. Forget about it. Unfortunately, you've got to understand, my parents both lived through the Second World War, and they never really warmed to our Teutonic brethren after that, I have to say, and I've inherited their prejudices. Okay, now, what?
Some Germans are quite.
Oh, yes, some of them are quite nice. Good. I had to explain that to one of my lecturers. I said, is he a good German? I said, he said, what is a good German? And I said, well, they were the ones who who didn't support the Kaiser. And he said, oh, he said, are you still talking about this in England? I said, yes. And the Kaiser. That I'm still not over the Kaiser. I haven't I haven't got on to Hitler yet, but when I get on to that, I mean, it's going to be a big thing, isn't it? Anyway, the point about this is, where were we? Yeah, the German liberal Lutheran theologians fixed this on this one verse. And they said, what you've got to understand about Jesus is Everything you understand about Jesus is wrong. Okay, that was their starting point. Jesus was an apocalyptic preacher who believed that the end was nigh. Then what happened? The end was not nigh after all. And St. Paul also said, well, the end is nigh, but perhaps not as nigh as we thought. And then after St. Paul, other people came along and they restructured the whole faith to say that Jesus was not talking about the end of the world coming next week. Jesus was talking about the kingdom of heaven, which was infinitely delayed. It was sort of something above us, which you'll get to when you die. Now, I don't agree. I mean, if this is, I don't agree with this, and I don't think you should either. In fact, please don't. Because what they're really saying is that Jesus was wrong and the Christian faith is nothing to do with Jesus. It's the invention of the church that followed Jesus. Now, you might have heard of a man called Rudolf Bultmann. Anyway, but you've not heard of Rudolf Bultmann. My goodness, there's acres of your brain which is just sort of full of beautiful things because Rudolf Bultmann has not entered and turned it all to dust and ashes. Rudolf Bultmann was the one who said, the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith, what we believe in is the Christ of faith, and the Jesus of history are completely separate. And about the Christ of faith, we can talk about what we all believe in, the object of our faith. But the Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus of history, we can know practically nothing. The belief of the Catholic Church is that the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith are the same person. Now, that is really very important. Evelyn Waugh, if you remember, how many of you read that great book, Helena, by Evelyn Waugh? Yeah, Mrs. Bednarowska, my revered tutor, said it was his worst book. Evelyn Waugh said it was his best book. And also the head of Campion Hall, Paul Edwards, may he rest in peace, said it was the best book ever. And what basically happened is that the Empress Helena is the daughter of old King Cole, who is English and practical, obviously. She's in conversation with some Eastern mystic, and the Eastern mystic sort of goes on about Osiris and Isis and all that palaver. And she said, when did this happen? And they say, oh, well, it all happened, on sort of an astral plane or something like that, and so on. Iris and Osiris, it's all happening up there, And she said, but when did it happen? I want to know, I want a faith based on something that actually happened. And then she decided she would investigate Christianity. And after being baptized, she went to Palestine to find the evidence of the crucifixion, which she did. And then she disappears from history. It's the most wonderful book. And it is the most profoundly Catholic book because it's telling you the Jesus of history is the Christ of faith. If there'd been no Jesus of history, there would be no Christ of faith. Now, this one verse, I admit it's problematical. This generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Well, is the sun going to grow dark? Is there going to be an apocalypse of the moon? Is Jerusalem going to be destroyed? Yes. So all these things, had they happened by AD 72? Well, yes. It all depends how you see this apocalypse. Is this an apocalypse that is happening the end of the world, or is it future events in Judea, particularly Emperor Titus destroying the temple and so on and so forth? And some people have pointed out, and I think it's a reasonable supposition, for the Jewish people, the destruction of the temple was the end of the world. I mean, the Jewish nation ceased to exist because it was a nation that's been gathered together around the temple. And in fact, the Jewish nation today still cannot quite get its head around the fact that there isn't a temple. They really are, it is a bit of a problem because what they've done is they have constructed a temple with words, with the holy books. They're the temple. But, other people say, well, we really need a temple. And of course, there is an element in contemporary Judaism which is all about refounding the temple, which of course is a bit awkward because there hasn't been a temple since AD 72. And it's rather a long time gap, isn't it? Just like I personally find Walsingham is a load of hooey because it ceased in AD 1536, 5, 4. And then an Anglican vicar said, oh, let's reopen it in 1920. So there was 400 years of nothing doing in Walsingham. And I think it had all gone cold by then.
Does that make a difference, though?
I think it makes a difference because it's got to be continuous. I just feel it's got to be continuous.
No, they just want enough faithful people around.
No, they'd all. But what happened was Norfolk was notorious for East Anglia was notorious for being a hotbed of Protestantism. The east of England, East Anglia and Kent and Essex were the most Protestant part of the country. If Lancashire was the most Catholic part of the country, Northumberland, places like that, or Wales, and so on and so forth. But St Winifred's Well continued to flourish. It didn't shut down, which is in North Wales.
I don't understand the logic of that, sorry.
Well, I think there's a break in the tradition.
So what?
And so I can't see how you can ricucire, as the Italians would say, sew back together from 1536 to 1920.
Does it? Because it's not new, doesn't mean that thing's broken. There's still people around who believe it.
I don't know. Well, let's.
It hasn't been raised to the ground.
Walsingham was semi-raised to the ground.
Did you say Seymour?
Yeah, it was semi-raised to the ground. I mean, there was a bit of that arch is there. Who's been to Walsingham? Yeah. What did? Oh, you what?
Yes, I've lived in Rosebery all the way. You do that Sacred Mile.
Yeah.
You fall asleep, I just get mesmerised in here.
The Slipper Chapel is old because that's a survival. But what is? I mean, you could have a survival, which is the building, but it was used as a hay barn or something. But what you don't have is the living tradition. And Catholicism is a living tradition. We don't.
Sorry, but does that mean that if you lapse, come back?
No, because it's the same you, isn't it? It just went a bit underground for a time.
But isn't that the same with
Yeah.
building, or it's still there, then it comes back? I don't understand.
I don't understand it either, but it's just what I feel. How many of you thought Walsingham was really wonderful? Oh, right, okay. Have you been? Or did you think it was really wonderful? Not fuss.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
What did you think of Aylesford?
So I went there long before
What did you think of Aylesford? Cold and rainy. A lot of people speak very highly. I've never been. Well, it's okay. Not fuss. Okay. The play is it the Midway?
Yes.
Oh gosh. I mean, to me, it's got to be what T.S. Eliot, who was, of course, an Anglican, said, you have come to a place where prayer has been valid. And the unbroken tradition, I think, is really important.
So that kind of all the faith that went before that was there,
It's gone cold.
But people come back again.
I find that reviving a corpse, in the end, you've tried it, haven't you? In resuscitation, banging away, oh God, oh yeah, and oh right, but that was good. How long? It wasn't 400 years, was it? Yeah. Yeah.
That's just based on your.
Yeah, my personal opinion.
Because I just don't understand the logic of that. I think that there's something embryonic. Or no, there's an embryo.
Yeah.
That you can.
I feel that there was a shrine there, and the modern shrine is an ersatz shrine. That's all.
Been blessed properly.
Yeah, when they are in here, I just feel it's ersatz.
You feel it's what?
Ersatz. You know what ersatz means? It's like, here's what I prepared earlier. I want a Wendy house. Okay, we'll build you a Wendy house out of proper bricks and so. Oh no, here's one we got you made out of plastic. And that's an ersatz Wendy house. Not the type of Wendy house I wanted.
The lady who wanted it to happen wasn't Catholic.
Yes, she was. Raquel, this was. Oh, but the person, Father Tooth, who refounded Walsingham.
Right.
And it's not even founded, the Holy House and the Anglican Shrine is not even in the correct place. I just find it doesn't float my boat. Okay, now, having gone off that subject, Jesus says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Now, there we see the Jesus of faith and the Christ of history. Everything will change. One thing will stay the same. The words of Jesus will not change. This idea that somehow or another, for example, there's a very, very famous German Lutheran liberal theologian who was a good German who was murdered by Hitler, and he was clearly an outstanding person. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you've heard of him, and yes, I mean, and was terrible because the day after or an hour after they gave the order by telephone for him to be executed, the lines went down. And he would have survived. He was only in his early 30s, I think, or 36 or something. So he would have, and he was the leading opponent of Hitler. He was a good German, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer was the one who said we must have an existential faith. Faith is the way you live. And somehow or another, I think that sort of separates it. And therefore, you don't need belief in Jesus did this, Jesus did that. I think we do need faith in Jesus did this, Jesus did that.
I think it helps people to make it, because you're not really an abstract type of person. I think if you want faith, then you can really root it in actual physical history.
So what I think what's that guy called? Bultmann was saying is whatever happened, happened. And then a ball started rolling, and that is the faith. But who kicked this ball originally is irrelevant. In other words, we got a house, but let's rejoice in the house we've got. But the actual foundations of the house we don't need to worry about. I might be misinterpreting the great Rudolf Bultmann here, but that's how I see it. To me, these things really happened. And Jesus made this speech on the Mount of Olives, facing the temple. Anyway, and then he said, but my words will not pass away. And that's true. Everything has passed away. The Jerusalem you see today is very beautiful. But there's nothing apart from the Western Wall and a few stones under the so-called Tower of David, which dates from the time of Jesus. They date from the time of King Herod. There's nothing that dates from the time of Solomon. There's nothing that dates from the time of King David. Oh, yes, there's a bit from King David because there's what's on so-called Mount Zion. That dates from the time of King David. And the buildings on the Temple Mount, the oldest one, which is the Dome of the Rock, dates from about 700 AD or 650 AD or 700 AD. And the Al-Aqsa Mosque is clearly a medieval building from its style. It's probably, it's Gothic. And you know those Gothic arches? Well, that's from the 13th, 14th century. There are a few Roman remains and so on. There is the Tunnel of Hezekiah, which is the oldest thing in Jerusalem. When he built this tunnel for sort of water conduits, it's mentioned in the Bible, and they both tunneled from opposite directions, and they met in the middle, exactly, and then somebody wrote on the wall, this is the place where we met in the middle, and it is written in Hebrew script. And that inscription of Hezekiah is the oldest thing in Jerusalem. And that is pretty old. That's impressive. But when everything else has passed away. But of that day or hour, nobody knows, neither angels in heaven nor the Son. This is talking about the end of the world, but only the Father. Be watchful, be alert. You do not know when the time will come. It's like a man traveling abroad. He leaves home and places his servant in charge, each with his work, and orders the gatekeeper to be on the watch. Watch, therefore, you do not know when the Lord of the house is coming, whether in the evening or midnight or cockcrow or in the morning. May he not come suddenly and find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to all, watch. So, having said there are going to be terrible signs in the heavens, etc., Jesus then says, you cannot know when the end of the world is coming. What you must do is be perpetually alert. So, this is, we said at the beginning, an apocalyptic discourse. I think it could better be called an anti-apocalyptic discourse. Because if you are the sort of person like the Jonestown people and Waco and uh, Joseph Smith Jr., you'd find this very disappointing because it's actually telling you stop that at once. And if you want to be an apocalyptic sort of person, this is a huge dampener. It's true that there are bits in it which sound quite promising. You know, in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened. Okay, there's going to be an eclipse. And the moon will not give its light. Well, that's going to have an eclipse too. And the stars will be falling from the sky. You'll see a shooting star one of these days. And the powers of the heavens will be shaken, whatever that means. That could remain the pagan gods will cease to function, or people's understanding of the pagan gods will cease to function. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory, and he will send out the angels and gather his elect. That refers to the Last Judgment, but that's about it. So what do you think of this passage? Now, it's very rarely read in church, or if it is read in church, nobody is listening. I mean, have you heard this read in church?
Well,
You weren't listening. You have, yeah?
About Mary and the snake.
That's the book of Revelation. That's the book of Revelation about the woman crowned with the stars and standing on the sun, about to give birth.
I've heard that.
Yeah, that is read on the feast of the Assumption, and it's read on the feast of the Assumption, isn't it? I saw, yeah, Magnum Signum in Cielo apparuit. A great sign appeared in the heavens. And of course, it shouldn't really be read on the Feast of the Assumption because the woman is not the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Oh, that's where I always get confused.
That's not the Blessed Virgin.
I thought it was the Virgin Mary.
Well, I mean, that's an interpretation. When people interpreted the scriptures allegorically, they said, oh, it must be the Blessed Virgin Mary. In fact, what it is probably Israel about to produce the Messiah.
Oh, it's a very ancient scripture.
Well, one of the things is that people make a big mistake with in the book of the Apocalypse of St. John, is everything means something else. So here, the name is a number, and it is the name of a man, 666. Well, that started off a massive charge of an industry, frankly, of people saying, what can this mean? And I don't think you're supposed to do that. I really don't. I mean, who do you think 666 is? The devil, or it's Nero, or it's Diocletian, or Domitian, or something like that. Or it's anybody you don't like. It could be anybody you don't like. Yeah, etc., etc., etc. Yes.
The description of Christ on the last day. That's quite a clear picture.
That is dogma. Jesus Christ will appear on the last day, coming in the clouds of heaven, and judge the whole world.
So that can't be unmistaken, really, can it?
No, it's coming in the clouds of heaven. What does that mean? I think it means he's going to come in such a way that you can't miss it. That's what it means. And of course, if you see that Last Judgment of Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, that is an interpretation of that passage. And this passage is harking back to the bit in the Apocalypse of Daniel, the Son of Man. I saw one like a Son of Man, etc., etc. And that apocalyptic scene, it is describing Daniel in the Michelangelo. It's much easier to look at the Michelangelo than to try and work out what Daniel means. And you see that people are rising from the dead, some to eternal life, some to be sent down to hell forever. And the angels are blowing their trumpets, and people are being gathered from all over for the great law court. And the Blessed Virgin Mary, Jesus is raising his arm to strike people, and the Blessed Virgin is holding his arm In other words, trying to moderate the punishment to come, which is a totally non-biblical thing. That's totally non-biblical. Jesus Christ is not vengeful and want to punish people horribly, and the Blessed Virgin stops him. But we do think of the Blessed Virgin as our advocate. So if the Last Judgment is like a law court, you're going to need a lawyer. And therefore your lawyer will be the Blessed Virgin Mary, who will appear as your character witness or something. Yeah? That's advocata nostra. But it's, again, the Virgin Mary as an advocate is not a biblical idea. It's a devotional idea. It's a nice idea. And it's a good idea. And it's a true idea. But it's not rooted in Scripture particularly. Is it? No. Well, any other comments on that? Do you think it's an interesting passage? It's a very interesting passage. It is, and I think and I think it's also very good for us to know that Jesus is a moderate in religion.
Well, I know you just said something else to say, and then you carry on.
Yeah, carry on.
It's just that the passage about when you see the desolating abomination standing, about them running away. Is this saying that at no point do you ever stand? Well, not do you ever stand. But, I mean, my thoughts would be to stand and fight and to protect what's yours, etc. So it is saying run away, get out quickly.
What is the advice that is given to people in terrorist attacks?
Stand. Well, in Grenfell, stay. What was the terrorist?
No.
Stay inside Grenfell.
And as was also in the Twin Towers. No, but in terrorist attacks, what is the advice? Yeah. Well, they were horrible. What is what do they? You should all know this. What do you do during a terrorist attack? No, run, don't hide. When run, don't hide. When there's a shooter in your school, and Jesus says the same. Run, don't.
There is a part of standing up against evil, sort of that.
Yeah, I think it's saying when you see the desolating abomination standing where he should not, you must flee to the mountains. I think it's sort of saying, I don't know.
So
run, don't hide.
The successful side didn't run and didn't hide.
I think when you're a civilian, I think you should run in many occasions. I don't know. Run, don't hide. I think it's a.
It seems very clear to do that as opposed to stand up what you think is right.
There's a very good incident that happened on the Titanic. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, there was this woman who said, she was quite old, and she said, "Oh, I've left my jewellery case in my cabin. Can you go down and get it for me?" And the answer to that is no. And then, of course, there was the famous comment of two survivors of the Titanic, a woman and her maid who were sitting in one of the lifeboats, and they watched the Titanic go down. And the lady turned to her maid and said, "There goes your beautiful nightdress." What our Blessed Lord is saying is leave everything and go.
So at no point stand up for what you think is.
No, I don't. I mean, when he does say stand up for what you think is right, it's because he says when you're in court, the Holy Spirit will give you words. But when you are facing apocalyptic societal meltdown, leave. Just like that lady I know, get on that horse, that cart, and do not stop until you get to Dusseldorf.
It feels like everything that's contradictory to what I've felt about faith.
It's pretty run. I don't know. I mean, it's but and that's what they did do. They did run. They left the city. I think one of the things that this reminds me of is that wonderful passage in the letter to the Hebrews. Here we have no abiding city. Sometimes translators, here we have no permanent city.
Maybe you would have if you stayed. Maybe you would have if you stayed in the
Yeah, but material. Oh, I think it's also saying material things should not tie you to a place.
It's that principle, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course, one of the people who say, we must leave. The Russians are going to be here tomorrow, and people who said, oh, we can't. Everything we've got is here.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's about.
Yes, I think. Yeah, right. I think it's to do with physical danger here, not to do with moral danger. I think it's one of the things is that this passage, this 13th chapter, cannot be intended in a univocal way. It's, in other words, it only means one thing and one thing alone. It can mean several things.
Is that what we call a cop-out?
No, I think what it's saying to us, do not think for a moment that the England you live in represents a permanent state of affairs.
Like we might have to leave.
No, but you might. But rather, remember, here you have no abiding city. You have no permanent city. You are strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Book of Hebrews.
But yes, if you compare that to what you said before about Walsingham, etc., where actually because these places, because they were abandoned, then faith was gone.
Yeah. I think actually with Walsingham, didn't they hang the last prior of Walsingham? I mean, what happened with the monks? Some of them were hanged, but the abbot of Reading was hanged. I think about 5 or 6 abbots were hanged, and the rest accepted the £5 a year pension. So it was carrot and stick.
Really, though, faith is gone.
Yeah. One of the things.
Away, faith won't be rebuilt.
Well, yeah. I think it's a point, isn't it? It gets you to think. It makes you think. It makes you think. So has everybody had a good think? It makes you think. I mean, all those people living in East Prussia never thought that they would have to get on the cart and keep on going till they got to Düsseldorf. And don't forget, they didn't have been on a cart in their lives because they had cars. And when there's no petrol, what do? And the poor old grandparents stayed behind. And we hope they were shot.
Sounds like Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, those people living in Ukraine never dreamed that would happen to them. Those people living in Syria never dreamed that what happened in Syria would happen to them. Those people living in Lebanon in the 1970s saying this place is the Paris of the East never dreamed it would turn into hell on earth. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the amount, even people in Somalia probably thought, oh, it's quite nice here. And then suddenly they woke up one day and they were in a failed state. I mean, Ethiopia, half of Kenya. I mean, once it was all lovely. And there's so many places that have gone to the dogs.
So like, you're saying it's a physical thing that
Yeah, I think so.
If we were suddenly attacked here at St. Clements, we wouldn't all run in to try and save it, we'd shoot down.
I don't know. I mean, don't know. Just make up your mind on be prepared for the worst.
Yeah.
But having said that, the worst may not happen. Yeah. The Scouts have got it right. Don't forget, the Scout movement is a Christian movement. Lord Baden-Powell was very devout. And he's very much admired in Italy, believe it or not. He's a massive following in Italy. Yes. And of course, he was, barking mad. But that made no difference. There have been quite a lot of people like that, and it made no difference. Okay, we're going to have to stop here because we've had 59 minutes and 4 seconds of pure fun. Okay, all the best. Bye.